What's going on? So I have told a couple patients now that I would make this video, so I'm finally going to do it, and it is a glute activation video. So glute activation, guys, I mean, for knee health, for low back health, for SI joint pain, for hip stability and hip joint health, so many things. Glute activation is, I don't even want to say it's underrated, because I feel like most people are talking about it, but then I feel like most people will talk about it, but the exercises don't really match what they're saying, or maybe they don't fully understand how best to facilitate that activation. And I do have a little bit of like a sequence that I like to go through, but I just want to talk a little bit about the mechanics of it today as we go through some of these exercises and some of the ones that I have found to best help activate that glute. I've worked with a large variety of people, which I think has given me some good insight on how to work with different populations on it. But obviously the bikini competitors in the fitness industry, in the fitness world, they are very focused on glute activation. And then also for low back pain, SI joint pain, knee pain, I've worked at it from kind of both sides of the spectrum, from the PT world, physical therapy, but then also from the CPT world, from personal training, and then from being an athlete myself. So these are some of the things that I have found most helpful. And we're going to kind of start from a low intensity and sort of work our way up. So the first thing that I want to talk about is an exercise that I call priming the pump. And it is basically working at activation in a fully contracted position, or an end range contracted position for the hip joint. So it's a lot easier for us to contract muscles in a shortened position. Some of the biomechanics out there, some of the hardcore exercise kinesiology folks are going to be like, well, that's whatever the muscle is strongest in the mid-range. That's fine. That's not what I'm talking about. It's easiest to activate it in a fully contracted position. That is where we have the best mind-muscle connection most of the time. Like, you're able to squeeze a muscle contracted if you're thinking about your bicep, or we're going to go through the glutes here in just a second. It's easiest to find that muscle mentally in its shortened position. So this first exercise plays into that. We are going to focus on this video. I'm going to activate my right glute. For me, that's what I like to do. I've got a right SI joint problem from an old motorcycle wreck, so I do a lot of this glute activation stuff on my right side. So the first thing we're going to be doing, if I'm priming the pump, I need that hip into relatively extended position, a relative hip extension. That is because that muscle is going to fire best in the shortened position. If you guys know, if you think about a squat pattern, if I'm here squatting, it's really easy to like fire my glutes in the up position. Most people cannot fire their glutes out of the bottom position. And that's the problem. We can always fire our glutes when we get to the top. They need to be active through the whole range of motion. We got to be able to fire them at the bottom and come out of that hole with our glutes versus just contracting them when we get to the top and like, oh, yep, I squeezed my butt at the top, I'm good. That's not really what we're after. So this first one, priming the pump, if I'm laying here, I'm going to let my left leg be bent, my right leg be straight, and as I contract my right glute, I rotate to the left. I'm not doing that I'm not rotating on purpose, but as I just contract the glute into the table, that's what happens, because it's raising my body up off of that glute as that muscle kind of fills out in towards the table. And then also, as a little bit of a byproduct of contracting that glute, I'm getting a little bit of hip extension isometrically into the table, which rotates me to the left. So this one, I like to do a contract and hold. You're going to contract and hold 2 seconds, come back down, contract and hold 2 seconds, come back down. I like to start with 2 sets of 10 on that exercise, or you have to stop if you feel like that mind-muscle connection is like on rep 1, it's okay, and then on like rep 5, it's like really good. And then you start to feel it phase out, like 8, 9, 10. You're like, it's getting worse and worse and worse. Stop. Stop when you feel it immediately start to reduce, and then just wait and then get your next set in. I don't want you to lose that good neural connection and that neural firing pathway to where we start to kick in other compensatory muscles as we are what I call getting neurological overflow, where maybe the muscle or the neural pathway to the particular muscle we are trying to fire gets fatigued, but we activate other things around that muscle to kick in. That's like the worst thing we can do, is training through that mechanical failure. We have like total failure where you can't even do it anymore, and we have mechanical failure where you can't do it right anymore. Do not train through mechanical failure, guys, because that is how you activate bad patterns. So 2 sets of 10 on that one, holding for 2 seconds, and that is priming the pump. We are priming those neural pathways. We're getting some blood flow into that muscle. We're getting some mind-muscle connection, and that's what we're trying to do, is just build that mind-muscle connection in an isometric position so that we go into an isotonic position. We're actually getting some range of motion. We've got that good mind-muscle connection, and we can feed off that and build off that. So I'm going to pause it here so we can go to the next exercise, and we'll pick up there. All right, guys, so I added a hip band just above my knee. If you guys are trying to activate your glutes and really build that mind-muscle connection, and honestly just build a good butt in general, get some of these hip bands. They're super cheap now. You can get them online. They're cotton bands. They've got these little rubber lines that help hold them onto your legs. But my gosh, I spent years as a physical therapist cutting these little band circles for people, and they just don't feel good. They work, but they're not really the same. These are way more comfortable. They last forever. You can wash them, and they just give you a better feel. And I will tell you, this is a whole nother rabbit hole, but if you are in pain, you cannot fire a muscle well, or if your sensory perception is very much distracted by like a rubber band pulling the hair off your legs, if you're a guy, you are going to lose some mind-muscle connection because of that. Your brain is tuned in to that sensory disturbance and not contracting the muscle. We don't want that. So put a hip band above your knees, and we're going to go down into a bridge position. And so with this is going to be a frog bridge. I am keeping my heels and my feet together. My feet are lined up nicely to where I can actually push my feet towards each other. And then as I bridge up, I'm going to push my feet towards each other and bring my knees out to the side. Okay? Come down, the knees come in, slowly and controlled. Bridge, push the knees out, get a really good squeeze, contract. Slow and controlled coming back down. I'm not going to get into the posterior and anterior pelvic tilt a whole lot. You guys should be relatively posterior tilted, meaning that if this is an anterior tilt and I'm rocked forward and I can fit my arm under my low back, that is a posterior tilt now where I'm flattening my back into the table. That posterior tilt should happen as a byproduct because the glute is a posterior rotator, but of the pelvis, but like don't overthink that one. Just chase the contraction, guys. That's what I'm going to always say, is chase the contraction wherever you feel that best. Same thing here, except we're going to up the rep range a little bit. 2 sets of anywhere in the 10 to 15 range. Same rule, okay? If you're fading out, if you're getting here and like 8 feels great, 9 feels good, and you're getting to 10, you're like, shit, I think I'm losing it. And then you get to 11, you're like, yeah, I'm definitely losing it. Or if you start to feel your low back kicking in, because again, what we can do is when our hip extensors are getting tired, we can shift and activate our low back extensors to get the same pattern, but it's not the same quality of movement. We're not getting the same muscle activation. That is not a good pattern to train. That's why people end up with this achiness all in their low back, is because their spinal erectors are trying to compensate for the movement pattern that the glutes aren't able to do. So we don't want to train that. But that is a good frog bridge. And we're pushing the feet together, we're rotating out, good control on the way in and the way out, but having something to contract against into that hip external rotation and abduction is huge for activating the glute, okay? So now we're going to flip it onto hands and knees, and we're going to go through another one of my favorites. And this is where we start. I'm going to use the left glute on this one just so you guys can see it a little better. We're going to come out at a diagonal, okay? So everything is stable at my trunk. My core, my stomach is drawn up towards my spine. I'm trying to not shift too far towards my stance side. And again, I'm chasing the contraction. I've said it 100 times, but if you guys are new to my channel, contract the muscle to create the movement. Do not create the movement to contract the muscle. That's the wrong way to think about it. So we are contracting the muscle to create the movement. The movement is a byproduct of the muscle contraction. So we're here. I'm going to contract this glute right out of the hole, or try to get some tension built into this muscle. And then I'm extending up and out and getting a really good squeeze in that muscle, for at least a 1 or a 2 count before I come back to neutral. And hopefully, if I'm doing a decent job, my trunk should not be shifting all over the place. You guys are going to want to do this. Whoop, and shift over. That's not great. That means we're lacking core stability, okay? If I'm going to use my core stabilizers and I have a 4-point stance, and then I move from a 4-point stance to a 3-point stance, the only way that I can do that without shifting my body is to create that stability from another location. That's how you're going to kick in your core stabilizers. But if we're shifting over to our stance side and stacking all of our body weight over that limb, we're not going to activate our core stabilizers, because all of a sudden we have removed the need for them. So that's not good. Same thing here, 10 to 15 repetitions, 1 to 2 second hold. You don't want to be arching your low back. Watch this rep. That's not great, okay? Keep that core drawn up, keep everything locked in, and then it's valuable to do both sides, guys, because we get a lot out of our stance leg too when we're doing this, okay? So a couple rounds, 10 to 15 reps, 1 to 2 second hold on those. That is a great one using the band as well. I'm going to pop the band back off, and we're going to go through the last 2. So the last 2 exercises, we don't need any equipment. You just need a mat and a little bit of energy left in the tank. Again, don't keep training these glutes. Like this whole glute circuit that I'm going through, this might not be great for you to go through all at one time. Eventually it is, but again, one of the things I hear people being like, oh, this is a glute activation circuit, and you run through this whole thing before your workout. Well, that's great, but if you quit feeling your glutes really firing like halfway through it, and then you're continuing to go through it, you're screwing yourself over, because you are training faulty patterns to kick in during hip extension based exercises, which is exactly what you don't want to do. You don't want to train through fatigue in a pattern that you're trying to facilitate, because when we train through that fatigue, then we are literally training our system on how to compensate and kick in the wrong muscles to perform the right movements. We've got to maintain that mind-muscle connection in order for this to be valuable. So we really like to do this one to wind up the system a little bit, so that again we are training that in range of motion glute contraction, but we're doing so in relative full range hip extension, because a lot of times we don't train that very much. So what we can do to get that is wind the system up and put the opposite limb in full range hip flexion. So if I'm laying here, what that looks like is I start in a bridge position. I'm going to bring my left knee as far as I can into my chest. Now this winds up some of our sacral supporting ligaments. I'm not really going to get into that, but just know that that's what it's doing. We are also relatively winding up the system as I bring this guy into full hip flexion. It moves this guy into more relative hip extension. So we're going to be holding that there. Again, keep your pelvis stable. You shouldn't be lifting and really rotating one way or the other. But from here, I'm just going to push my glute into the table, lift and hold, and then come back down. Push into the table, lift and hold, and come back down. Now, I'll be honest, this is the hardest one we've done so far to do well and do it correctly. You're not going to have a ton of range of motion. Don't worry about that, but you are fighting to get more range of motion over time. We also can't really compensate on this with low back extension, because this guy's wound all the way up into flexion. The posterior pelvic tilt is just a byproduct of this position, and so is a little bit of lumbar flexion. So we can't go into lumbar extension and use those lumbar extensors to help really create this movement. So you're really finding a good way here to isolate the glute. I do want your heel pretty close to your butt on this one, and you're again trying to not overactivate your hamstrings. You may have to play around with that a little bit, but if you're doing things like pulling your heel towards your butt in mentally or isometrically into the table, which again is a recommendation of a lot of people to activate your posterior chain. It's a good recommendation, can be good, but if you're using it wrong and you're activating your hamstring, then we're losing out on that potential glute activation to facilitate the pattern. And a lot of you folks are hamstring dominant when your glute is weak. And that is a hard pattern to turn off. We got to turn off that hamstring before we can really turn on the glute very well. So some of these positions, again, that priming the pump pattern is really valuable, and not overreaching, not picking an exercise that is too hard for where you're at. Finding your point in the ladder of progression of intensity is just completely probably the most valuable thing you can do, to be honest. Because if you're jumping too high off that ladder, again, you're going to throw in the wrong muscle groups. We're going to get neurological overflow to other muscles around us to help create enough overall net force to move our body into the pattern, even though the right muscle on its own isn't able to do that. So 2 rounds, 10 to 12 on this one. A little bit more reps if you can, but gosh, 10 to 12 good reps of that, of like a 1 second hold or a 2 second hold, firing up through that glute with the system wound up. That's enough for the most part. So the very last one, I'm going to face this way again. That was so that was me showing on the right glute. This one's going to be on the left so that you guys can see what I'm doing here. We are starting in almost like a side plank position, but with a side plank, you are stacking your knees under your hips, under your shoulders, and then we're just lifting. Now this is a little bit of glute med and obliques. So the way I want to modify this is bend your legs, okay? And then now what we're going to do as we go into the side plank, we're starting in hip flexion. As we plank, we're going to end in hip extension. Down in hip flexion, up in hip extension. And I'm using just the bottom glute, guys. I'm pushing this knee into the table and extending. So relatively, this and this is doing the exact same thing at my hip. I'm going to show you from this side. Hip is bent, okay? Shoulders still over hip, but knees are not under hips. At the bottom, at the top, everything's stacked. And I'm driving with that bottom glute to get up into this position. You can add a little bit of a clamshell if you want, I don't really care. But the bottom, I want your bottom leg to be the focus, and you're chasing that contraction in the bottom glute. And again, we'll go 2 rounds, 10 to 15 reps here with a 1 second hold. But guys, those are some awesome glute activation and glute priming exercises, and then those can funnel right into your glute strengthening routine once you feel like you've really got the mind-muscle connection built in those patterns. So I hope this was helpful. Feel free to direct message us if you have any questions. And if you are going through this stuff and you are just feeling one glute not activate, you've got to have somebody take a good look at you and figure out why that's happening. Is it something at the low back or the SI joint to where we're not getting, our body's not letting us fire that muscle well? And we've got to get that cleared out. If you're constantly asymmetrical, this is not going to fix the problem, guys. So get in to see somebody that knows what they're looking at, that deals with this stuff, and help them clear out that dysfunction so that you can actually activate your glutes and get the most out of this routine. Thanks for watching.